350 guests rose to their feet as my sister glided down the aisle, radiant beneath the chandeliers. Cameras flashed, violins soared, and for a moment, it felt like perfection until I saw him. My grandfather, Henry Collins, sitting quietly in the back, wearing his old gray suit and that faded watch he'd worn since forever. When he stood to greet her, Samantha hesitated. Then, smiling for the crowd, she said, "Oh, sir, you must be mistaken. Sir, not Grandpa, just sir." The room laughed. Her new in-laws smirked at the old man in a cheap suit. They didn't know that the man they were mocking built the hotel they were standing in and could buy and sell every diamond in that room. Grandpa didn't argue. He simply sat down, hands folded, eyes calm. But I saw it, the quiet before the storm. And when he finally spoke, every smile disappeared. The morning of my sister's wedding felt like something straight out of a magazine spread. White roses lined the marble stairway of the Collins Vineyard Hotel, chandeliers glittered like captured stars, and a small orchestra tuned under the glass dome. People kept saying it was the wedding of the year. They weren't wrong. Samantha Collins, now soon to be Mrs. Samantha Miller, had spent months turning this day into a fairy tale. Her fiancé, Preston Miller III, came from one of Boston's oldest families. Their name was printed on museum walls and old trust funds. Ours? On construction permits and blueprints. I watched from the edge of the ballroom as photographers surrounded her. Samantha looked perfect, Vera Wang gown, flawless smile, the kind of beauty that made people forget the truth behind it. But I couldn't. Because that dress, that venue, the imported orchids, every bit of it had been paid for by the man sitting quietly near the back. My grandfather, Henry Collins, the founder of Collins Global Properties. The man who once dug ditches to afford my mother's medicine, who built an empire with his bare hands and an iron sense of honor. He didn't look like a billionaire that day. No custom tuxedo, no gold cufflinks, just the same old gray suit he wore to every family milestone. The same one he wore to my high school graduation, with a tear at the pocket that he refused to mend. "Reminds me where I started," he always said. I thought people would recognize him. How could they not? The Collins name was carved into the hotel's marble archway, for God's sake. But when he walked in, people stared like he didn't belong. "Who invited the janitor?" one of Preston's cousins whispered, loud enough for me to hear. I froze. Grandpa heard too, but he didn't even flinch. Just smiled that small, patient smile of his and nodded politely to the guests who turned away. When Samantha finally entered the room, she didn't look at him. Not once. She floated past the tables, surrounded by Preston's family, their pearls and diamonds gleaming like armor. Grandpa rose from his chair, slow but proud. "She's beautiful," he murmured. "Yeah," I whispered back, my throat tight. "She is." And then she looked his way. For a moment, our eyes followed hers, and I swore she was about to smile, to wave, to do something human. But instead, she turned her head, like she hadn't seen him at all. The orchestra played louder. The laughter swelled. But in that second, I felt the first crack form in something I'd thought was unbreakable. That was the moment I realized. This wedding wasn't just about love. It was about erasure. Samantha wasn't just marrying into wealth, she was burying where she came from. And Grandpa? He let her. He sat down, folded his hands, and waited. Not in defeat, but in quiet, deliberate patience. Because Henry Collins never raised his voice to prove his worth. He built entire empires to do it for him. And that day, I could already feel one of those empires starting to move. The ceremony was flawless, at least from a distance. Every note of the orchestra, every flicker of candlelight, every perfectly timed smile was rehearsed to perfection. Samantha and Preston looked like they belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine. But as I stood near the aisle, my stomach twisted with something cold and sour. Grandpa was seated near the back, alone at a table meant for miscellaneous guests. I saw the place card Henry Collins typed in the smallest font, tucked beside a seat reserved for catering staff who rotated trays of champagne. When Samantha and Preston reached the altar, I glanced at Grandpa. His hands trembled slightly as he clapped, that same gentle pride in his eyes. To him, love was sacred. Family was everything. He didn't care about the glitz or the social status, he just wanted to see his granddaughter happy. After the ceremony, guests flooded the reception hall. Crystal chandeliers glowed above us, and laughter filled every corner. It should have been joyous, but it wasn't. When Grandpa approached the couple, the air seemed to shift. The chatter dimmed just enough for me to hear every word. "Samantha," he said softly, his voice shaking a little. "You look exactly like your grandmother on our wedding day." She froze. Preston's arm tightened around her waist, a subtle warning. Cameras flashed. Reporters lingered nearby. "Oh, sir," she said, her voice suddenly light, forced. "You must be mistaken." My breath caught. "Sir?" She turned to her new father-in-law, smiling nervously. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. He must have wandered in from one of the staff areas." Preston's father chuckled. "These things happen. He does look out of place." Out of place. I wanted to scream. My fists clenched until my nails dug into my palms, but Grandpa didn't move, didn't defend himself. His expression didn't even change. He simply nodded and said, "Congratulations, young lady. You've grown beautifully." His voice cracked on the last word. Then he turned and walked back toward his table, each step echoing louder in my chest than the orchestra playing Canon in D. Preston's mother leaned toward her husband, whispering just loud enough for me to catch. "Poor man. Maybe security should escort him out quietly before he embarrasses himself." The guests laughed. Laughed. I pushed through the crowd, tears stinging my eyes. When I reached Grandpa, he was already seated again, adjusting his napkin with trembling fingers. "Grandpa," I whispered, "why didn't you say something?" He smiled faintly. "And ruin her moment?" "But she just denied you. In front of everyone." He patted my hand. "I've lived long enough to know that the truth doesn't need defending, Chloe. It only needs time." I swallowed hard. He looked out at the glittering ballroom, at Samantha laughing beside her new family. "She's building a castle on clouds," he murmured. "And clouds always fall." Something about the way he said it made me shiver. That night, as the music swelled and champagne flowed, I realized my grandfather wasn't broken by her rejection. He was waiting. And when Henry Collins waited, the world usually learned why. Growing up, I never saw my grandfather as rich. To me, he was the man who fixed the fence himself instead of calling someone. The man who carried lunch in a metal box even when he could have eaten at the best restaurants. The man who smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee, and who still sent handwritten thank you notes to every worker who stayed late. It wasn't until high school that I realized how big his empire really was. The Collins name wasn't just on our mailbox, it was on half the skyline. Collins Global Properties owned resorts, office towers, even this very vineyard hotel where my sister was now pretending he didn't exist. "Your grandpa doesn't talk about money because he remembers what it costs," Mom once told me. Back then, I didn't understand. Now I did. Henry Collins had started with nothing. A widowed father by 30, he worked construction by day and drafted real estate plans by night. He'd once told me, "Every rich man I met started by convincing someone to trust him. I just made sure I was worth trusting." He built everything from scratch, his business, his fortune, his reputation. But the one thing he valued most wasn't any of that. It was family. That's why Samantha's betrayal cut so deep. She wasn't just denying a man, she was denying the foundation he'd built his entire life on. I remembered when she was little how she used to ride on Grandpa's shoulders through the unfinished halls of his first hotel. "One day," she'd said, "I'll have my wedding here." And Grandpa had laughed, his voice echoing off bare concrete walls. "Then I'll make sure it's the prettiest place on earth." He kept that promise. The chandeliers above us, the imported marble under our feet, the garden that looked like a Monet painting, all of it existed because of him. And yet, that night, she acted like he was a stranger who had wandered into someone else's dream. I couldn't stop thinking about the contracts I'd seen in Grandpa's office a few weeks before. He'd asked me to help him sort them: venue bookings, catering deposits, floral agreements, all signed under the Collins Foundation. At the time, I thought it was sweet that he was helping Samantha financially. Now, it felt like a ticking time bomb she didn't even know she'd built herself. As the orchestra played and champagne glasses clinked, Grandpa sat quietly at his table, watching it all unfold. He didn't look angry, just Tired. Do you ever get used to people changing? I asked him once. When a business partner had betrayed him years ago, he'd smiled sadly. No. But I've learned something better. They always show you who they are right before they fall. Back then, I thought he was being dramatic. Now, as I watched Samantha laugh with the Millers, her laughter just a little too bright, a little too forced, I realized he'd been right. She had changed. But Grandpa hadn't. And that scared me more than anything. Because when Henry Collins stopped talking, it didn't mean he'd given up. It meant he was planning. Dinner service began like a symphony of perfection. Polished silverware, soft jazz, and laughter that sparkled almost as brightly as the champagne. The Millers had spared no expense flaunting their wealth, but for all their money, they had no class. I watched from my seat as one of the guests, Preston's aunt, a woman with a diamond necklace thick enough to double as a leash, leaned towards Samantha and whispered, "Such a shame about the staff wandering too close to the main tables earlier. Management really should keep them separate." Samantha giggled. She didn't even glance toward the back of the room, where Grandpa sat alone, his chair slightly turned away from the spotlight. Every part of me burned. Then, as if on cue, Preston's father raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he declared, "and to families who understand refinement." The word refinement hung in the air like poison gas. Everyone knew what it meant. Everyone except Grandpa, or maybe he did, and chose to let them choke on their own arrogance. I looked at him. His hands were still, folded neatly on the tablecloth, the same way they were when he negotiated multi-million-dollar deals. His face was calm, but his eyes, they carried that still, dangerous patience I'd seen only once before, when a rival company tried to cheat him out of a contract. He hadn't yelled then either. He'd simply smiled, waited, and by the next morning, that company didn't exist. Preston's mother caught sight of Grandpa again. "That man," she murmured to another guest, "has been staring all evening. Maybe he's one of those old patrons who think they own the place." I nearly laughed. Own the place, if only she knew. I stood up, ready to say something, but Samantha caught my wrist. Her smile was tight, her voice a hiss behind her teeth. "Chloe, sit down. Please, don't make a scene. Are you kidding me? They're talking about Grandpa like he's garbage." Her eyes darted toward the head table. "This is my life now. I can't afford drama." "Drama?" I whispered, furious. "That man built this hotel. You wouldn't have a single flower here without him." Her expression hardened. "He built his world, Chloe. I'm building mine." For a moment, I didn't even recognize her. Grandpa must have noticed our argument because his eyes met mine from across the room. He shook his head slightly, a silent plea. "Don't." So I didn't. I sat down, trembling with a mix of rage and shame. When the waiter came around, Grandpa only asked for water. No wine, no dessert, just a glass of water and a quiet corner. Preston Sr. noticed and smirked. "Ah, a man of simplicity. How admirable. Or inconvenient," his wife added, laughing softly. The laughter spread again, that awful, sophisticated laughter people use to hide cruelty behind charm. Grandpa lifted his glass. "To simplicity," he said softly, before taking a sip. No one toasted back, but in that silence, something shifted. I could feel it like static before lightning. The kind of silence that doesn't mean surrender. The kind that means calculation. He didn't storm out. He didn't defend himself. He simply waited, eyes calm, hands steady, as the very people he'd made wealthy mocked the ground they stood on. That night, I finally understood something about my grandfather. He didn't need to fight to win. He just needed everyone else to finish digging their own graves first. By the time dinner plates were cleared, the night had turned heavy, not from food, but from pride. Every conversation hummed with the same arrogance, the same glittering lies wrapped in polite smiles. You could almost hear the money talking louder than the people themselves. Preston's father, ever the showman, took the microphone for his toast. His voice boomed across the ballroom, smooth and practiced. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate not only love, but legacy. Our family has always stood for excellence, refinement, tradition. And now, we welcome Samantha into that tradition." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. But his next words felt like a blade twisting. She comes from humble roots, but her grace proves that class can't be bought. It's inherited or married into. The room laughed. Even Samantha forced a tight smile, pretending not to notice the cruelty buried in the compliment. Grandpa didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just stared into his glass of water as if measuring how long patience could last before it spilled over. When the applause faded, he rose slowly from his seat. The sound of his chair scraping against the marble floor was louder than the orchestra. Heads turned. Whispers rippled. "Henry?" I whispered, using his first name the way I did when we talked business. "Please don't." "Ah." He smiled at me gently. "Sometimes, Chloe, silence costs more than words." And with that, he began to walk toward the stage. It wasn't a dramatic march, just steady, calm steps. The kind of movement that made you wonder if the ground itself should be nervous. The room began to shift uneasily. Preston's mother frowned. The photographer lowered his camera. Even the band trailed off mid-note. Preston Sr. looked surprised but amused. "Sir, I'm afraid this is a private moment," he said lightly, still holding the microphone. Grandpa reached him, nodded politely, and said, "Then perhaps I should make a private correction in public." A murmur spread like fire. The guests leaned forward, curiosity replacing boredom. He looked at Samantha first. "You've done well tonight," he said. "Beautiful gown, fine music, a celebration worthy of your grandmother's dreams." Her lip trembled. "Grandpa, but," he raised a hand. "Don't worry, I won't embarrass you." He turned to the crowd. "Though, I might enlighten a few of your guests." The tension thickened. Preston Sr. tried to regain control. "I think we've had enough speeches," but Grandpa's voice cut through him like steel wrapped in velvet. "There's one more bill to settle before the evening ends." I swear you could feel every breath in the room freeze. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small leather folder, the same one I'd seen on his desk the week before. I recognized the seal embossed in gold, Collins Global Properties. He placed it gently on the table before him. Every contract for tonight's event, the venue, the catering, the entertainment, even this vineyard carries one name at the top. Mine. You could have heard a pin drop. He smiled faintly, eyes still calm. "So before we continue celebrating refinement, perhaps it's time to acknowledge where refinement truly came from." Preston Sr.'s face went pale. You're joking." Grandpa finally took the microphone. His grip was steady, his voice unshaken. "I don't joke about legacy or gratitude." Then he looked right at Samantha. "You may pretend not to know your family, but tonight, the world will remember exactly who you came from." And in that single moment, the air changed. The laughter died. The storm had arrived. I don't remember who gasped. First, maybe me, maybe one of the guests, but the sound swept through the ballroom like a wave. Preston's father froze mid-smile, his champagne glass trembling in his hand. The string quartet faltered, notes dying in the air. Grandpa's voice, though quiet, carried across every inch of that glittering room. "Everything you see here, every flower, every chandelier, every drop of wine was funded by Collins Global. That's my company." Someone laughed nervously. "You can't be serious," Preston Sr. muttered, trying to recover. Grandpa's eyes didn't waver. Serious enough that the receipts totaled just over $1 billion. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Samantha's face drained of color. The photographers froze. Flashes stopped mid-click. The air itself felt electric, sharp enough to cut through silence. Preston's mother whispered, "He's bluffing." Grandpa heard her. "Madam," he said gently, "if I were bluffing, you'd still have power." Then he reached into the folder and pulled out several crisp documents, contracts, stamped and notarized, bearing his unmistakable signature. He laid them on the table like cards in a final hand of poker. "The Collins Foundation financed every vendor tonight. And as of this moment," he said, his voice firm but calm, "that funding is withdrawn." For a second, nobody understood what that meant. Then, one by one, the hotel lights flickered. The music stopped completely. The catering manager rushed toward the stage, pale-faced. "Mr. Collins," he stammered, "should we proceed with the new instruction?" Grandpa nodded once, and just like that, the staff began packing up. Trays of untouched desserts vanished. The champagne fountains were turned off. Waiters exchanged uneasy glances before wheeling away silver carts. Guests murmured in confusion. "What's happening?" someone asked. "Is this part of the entertainment?" Preston Sr. stepped forward, his face crimson. "This is absurd. You can't just shut down a private event." Grandpa turned to him, still polite, still deadly calm. "I can when I own the event, the venue, and the company that signs your paychecks." The ballroom erupted into chaos, not shouting, but whispers, frantic and terrified. I saw Preston grab Samantha's arm. "What the hell is going on?" She was shaking. I didn't know," she whispered, voice cracking. "I swear I didn't know." Grandpa finally looked at her, and that look, it wasn't anger. It was heartbreak carved into stillness. "Oh, Samantha," he said quietly. "You knew enough to be ashamed of me. That was all you needed to know." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, Grandpa. I just wanted them to accept me. I didn't mean—" He stopped her with a single gesture. "You wanted to fit in with people who mock kindness and worship appearance. Congratulations, my dear. You fit perfectly." Preston's father stepped between them. "Now see here, old man." "Old man?" Grandpa interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "That old man owns this hotel, the vineyard that supplied your wine, and the brokerage that manages your real estate trust. Perhaps you'd like to rethink your tone before I decide to restructure a few portfolios." The color drained from Preston Sr.'s face. Then Grandpa did something no one expected. He turned to the guests, all 350 of them, and spoke not with fury, but clarity. "I built my life on the idea that work gives dignity, and money means nothing without respect. I taught my family the same. Tonight, I was reminded how easily people trade both for applause." He paused, letting silence settle like a verdict. "So, here's my final toast." He lifted his glass of water, still untouched. "To honesty. It's not served here tonight, but I hope you all find it someday." He placed the microphone back on the table, nodded to me, and started walking toward the exit. Samantha reached out, desperate. "Grandpa, please don't do this." He didn't turn around. I already did. Then, as if on cue, the main chandelier dimmed, casting the room in an eerie half-light. The luxury crowd, the refined elite, stood frozen among empty tables, plates of half-eaten food, and a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. I followed him with my eyes until the door closed behind him. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. He hadn't just ended the wedding. He'd ended the illusion that had kept it alive. Everything Samantha thought she'd gained, wealth, status, approval, vanished in the space of one quiet speech. And the people who had mocked the old man in the cheap suit, they finally understood what real power looked like, and it wasn't wearing designer. The ballroom erupted into confusion the moment Grandpa left the stage. Voices overlapped, chairs scraped against the marble floor, and the illusion of perfection cracked like glass under pressure. The orchestra quietly packed up. The waitstaff moved like ghosts, collecting untouched champagne flutes. It was as if the entire event, the lights, the laughter, the music, had been built on strings that Grandpa had just cut. Samantha stood frozen in the center of it all, still in her white Vera Wang gown, still surrounded by flowers that suddenly seemed more like funeral wreaths than wedding decor. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere left. The fairy tale had ended, and she was still on stage. Preston grabbed her arm. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't think he'd—" "You didn't think?" His voice rose. "You let this happen. You humiliated my entire family." "Your family?" I couldn't hold back anymore. I stepped forward, my voice sharper than I intended. "She humiliated our family first." He turned to me, furious. "Stay out of this." But I didn't. Grandpa built this entire night for her. Every rose, every chandelier, every glass of champagne, all him. And she stood there and called him sir. End quote. Samantha's tears spilled, streaking down her perfect makeup. "Chloe, please, no," I snapped. "You don't get to cry about this now." The whispers around us grew louder. Some guests stared in shock. Others fumbled for their phones, pretending not to record but capturing every moment. Across the room, Preston's father was red-faced, pacing near the bar. "We'll sue him," He can't just cancel service mid-event. We had contracts. The hotel manager, visibly pale, approached him cautiously. Actually, sir, the contracts were all signed under Mr. Collins' foundation. Your family name isn't listed on any of the financial documents. Preston Sr. froze. You're lying. I'm not, the manager said quietly. Without final authorization from Mr. Collins, our operations cannot legally continue tonight. Preston's mother gasped. Do you know who we are? The manager's tone softened, but his words landed like a stone. Yes, guests. The crowd began to thin. Guests whispered apologies to each other, some slipping out before their reputations could be attached to the spectacle. The photographer packed his gear in silence. Samantha collapsed into a chair, sobbing into her hands. Her dress, that immaculate $40,000 gown, pooled around her like a cage. Preston looked down at her, disgust flickering across his face. You told me your grandfather was just some retired contractor. You lied to me. She looked up, desperate. I didn't lie, You just what? He hissed. Didn't want me to know your fortune didn't come from old money like mine? That your family actually worked for it? She shook her head, broken. I just wanted you to see me as one of you. He stepped back. Congratulations, Samantha. You are pretentious, superficial, hollow. I wanted to hate him for his cruelty. But in that moment, even he wasn't wrong. At the far end of the room, I spotted a familiar face, a journalist from the Boston Ledger. He was already typing furiously into his phone, camera light blinking red. By morning, this would be everywhere. The headline practically wrote itself. Billionaire disowns granddaughter mid wedding, guests left in shock. I took a deep breath and walked towards Samantha. For a moment, I didn't see the glamorous woman in the gown. I saw my sister, the one who used to sneak cookies with me in Grandpa's kitchen, the one who once told me she wanted to make him proud. Sam, I said quietly, kneeling beside her. He didn't do this to destroy you. She looked up, eyes red, mascara streaked. Then why does it feel like he did? Because truth always feels like an attack when you're living a lie. She sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. Around us, the Millers huddled together, whispering in panic. Their perfect image had shattered, and they were scrambling to pick up shards without bleeding. I looked at Samantha again. He gave you everything, Sam. But respect isn't inherited, it's earned. You wanted to fit in with people who thought his work made him less. But tonight, you learned it made him more. She didn't answer. By the time the ballroom was empty, only a few candles flickered weakly on the tables. The grand chandeliers that once shimmered proudly now reflected nothing but shadows. The Millers left without saying goodbye. Samantha stayed seated, her hands trembling, whispering one word over and over like a prayer she wished someone would answer. Why? I didn't tell her the truth that she already knew why. That this was the price of forgetting where you came from. Because when you trade family for status, you don't just lose people, you lose yourself. A week after the wedding, the headlines hadn't stopped. Every socialite magazine, business column, and gossip site ran the same story with slightly different wording. Billionaire disowns granddaughter after $1B wedding scandal. Old money meets real power. Collins family drama stuns Connecticut. Bride Denise grandpa loses empire overnight. I stopped counting after the 10th article. But the worst part wasn't the coverage, it was how quiet everything became afterward. Samantha vanished from social media. The Millers stopped answering calls. Preston's family resigned from 2 charity boards to avoid public distraction. Their empire, built on reputation, began to crumble under the weight of a single man's truth. Grandpa didn't give a single interview. He refused every request for comment. When I asked him why, he said, "People who crave noise reveal guilt. Silence reveals confidence." But even silence couldn't hide how much it hurt him. I caught him once, sitting on the porch at dawn, a cup of coffee in hand, staring at the vineyard he'd built with his bare hands. His eyes looked older. "She'll come around," I told him quietly. He didn't look at me. "Or she won't. That's the thing about love, Chloe. It's not a contract, it's a choice." 3 weeks later, Samantha finally called me. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Can I see him?" "Come," I said simply. She arrived at Grandpa's estate the next afternoon. No luxury car this time. She came in a borrowed sedan, her hair pulled back, makeup gone, wearing jeans and a wrinkled sweater. It was the first time I'd seen her look real, in years. When she stepped into the study, Grandpa didn't stand or glare. He just looked up from his paperwork and said, "Hello, Samantha." She froze, eyes glistening. "Grandpa, I came to say I'm sorry." He didn't answer right away. The only sound was the faint ticking of the old clock behind him. "Sorry for what?" he asked softly. She swallowed. "For pretending I didn't know you. For being ashamed of you. For forgetting who I was." He nodded once, slowly. "And what have you learned?" "That status means nothing," she said, her voice breaking. "The people I tried to impress disappeared the moment I embarrassed them. But you—" She hesitated, tears streaming freely now. "You didn't even need to say a word, and you destroyed everything they believed in." Grandpa set down his pen. "I didn't destroy it, child. I just removed the foundation they were standing on. If something collapses that easily, it was never strong to begin with." She sank into the chair across from him, trembling. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start," he said gently, "by working for what you took for granted." She blinked. "Work?" He gestured toward a folder on the desk. "Collins Foundation needs project coordinators for our community housing division. Starting pay, $42,000 a year. You'll report to the regional manager, not to me. You'll work 8-hour shifts. You'll be treated like everyone else because you are." Samantha's lips parted in shock. "You want me to earn your dignity back," he interrupted calmly. "And, maybe one day, my trust." For a long time, she said nothing. Then she nodded. "I'll do it." When she left the room, I followed her to the door. Her hands were shaking. "You okay?" I asked. She let out a shaky laugh. "No, but maybe that's the point." 6 months passed. Samantha didn't return to New York. She stayed in Connecticut, working quietly in the foundation's local office. She started wearing simple clothes, took the train instead of a car, packed her own lunch. People who'd known her before barely recognized her. One afternoon, I dropped by her office to surprise her. She was sitting at her desk, surrounded by files and blueprints, explaining to a small team how to budget for affordable housing repairs. Her tone was calm, confident, kind. When she looked up and saw me, she smiled a small, real smile. "Hey, Chloe, you want to see something cool?" She led me outside to a nearby construction site, a modest community project sponsored by the foundation. Workers were laughing, building, painting, and there she was, right in the middle of it, helping an older woman lift a box of supplies. Watching her, I realized something. This wasn't humiliation. It was rebirth. That night, when Grandpa asked me how Samantha was doing, I didn't give him a long report. I just said, "She's earning it." He smiled faintly, eyes soft. "Good. Maybe she'll finally understand that wealth isn't what you inherit, it's what you build when no one's watching." Months later, during the foundation's annual dinner, Grandpa stood on stage again. But this time, there were no chandeliers, no luxury gowns, no champagne fountains, just a modest hall filled with volunteers and families the foundation had helped. Samantha sat beside me, hands clasped nervously in her lap. When Grandpa finished his speech, he paused, scanning the crowd. Then his eyes landed on her. "Some mistakes," he said, "don't end a legacy. They redefine it." He raised his glass of water, of course. "To forgiveness, not the kind that's spoken, but the kind that's earned." Samantha's eyes shimmered with tears. I reached for her hand, and she squeezed mine back. For the first time since that disastrous night, I felt peace settle between us. Because redemption, like wealth, doesn't happen overnight. It's built one honest choice at a time. And as the applause echoed softly through the hall, I could almost hear Grandpa's favorite saying in my head, the one he'd told us both when we were kids. "Real class isn't about how high you climb. It's about remembering who lifted you up."